Discussions and debates on topics of relevance, not just academic and clinical, but almost philosophical, and speaking to the direction of our and the future of the practice of surgery. I also would like to welcome our colleagues around the world at our various sites to which we are webcasting this presentation. And before I introduce our moderators for the session, I would like to just tell you a little bit about the drill and how it's going to work this afternoon. Each of you have been issued one of the audience response system units, and before each debate, the question to be debated will be posed to you, and you are asked to respond. You'll have just a very few seconds to do that. Respond to the question. The debate will then ensue, and following the debate, you'll be asked post-debate to respond and give your opinion on the question. We will be holding the pre and post polls to the very end of the session to have a look at who has swayed your opinion and where you, the audience, stand on these various issues. So I just encourage you, you will see before each debate, you'll see the question posed. It'll only be there for a few seconds. After each debate, you'll see the post-question posed and then the pre-question for the following debate. So if you can just follow through, it'll be good theater to see how you, the audience, have been impacted by these presentations. I'd now like to present our moderators, Dr. John Hunter and Dr. Rick Green, who will be moderating the debates.
Adrian, thank you very much. This should be a lot of fun. That's the pure intent of this. SAGES is a meeting that is generally fun as well as educational, and I think this session will do that. We're going to take a sort of traditional debate format, and that the first speaker will speak for 8 minutes, and the second speaker will then come up and speak for 8 minutes, and then that second speaker has 2 minutes to rebut the first speaker, and he can sort of use that 10-minute time to do his rebuttal at the same time he's giving his argument, at which point the first speaker then gets back up for 2 minutes as a final, gets the last word. And then you guys vote again. So that's how it's going to go. And so I think we should go ahead and get started, if that's okay, Dr. Green.
Thank you, Dr. Hunter. Ladies and gentlemen, the first debating point is, be it resolved, the academic medical center is failing economically, operationally, functionally, and in leading innovation and discovery. Please vote at this time whether you vote for or against that resolve. And remember, we won't see it now, but we'll see it at the end. We'll see how much the speakers sway your opinion. Everybody votes. Thank you. For the affirmative, I would like to call to the podium your past president, Dr. Lee Swanstrom from Portland, Oregon. Dr. Swanstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to defend this, even though I'm sitting next to my chairman. And I hope I don't get in trouble. No, this is, as I sat down to do this, I thought, well, what am I going to talk about? And I found that there's a wealth of ammunition, and I suspect I'll thoroughly trounce my worthy opponent, Dr. Soper. So my disclosure for this is that for the purposes of this talk, an academic medical center refers to the traditional university hospital and faculty practice plan model. Faculty refers to traditional university full-time faculty. And a non-academic medical center refers to a community-based tertiary referral and teaching health system. I did this because I wanted to compare apples to apples, and I think it's only fair to throw teaching into the mix with this. Well, I would pose to you that the mission of the current university medical center is education, research, and clinical excellence. I don't think anybody would argue with that. However, I would also say that in the information age, there are serious problems with the academic medical system. Multiple problems: hierarchical and competitive faculty structures, archaic administrative systems, heavy reliance on surgeons and training as a workforce, emphasis on basic science research over translational, failure to achieve marketplace competitiveness, bad relationships with the community at times. This could be both the medical community and citizens, and what the perceived priorities are by the potential patients of our university healthcare systems. I think part of this goes back to the education mandate of university systems, and we know that the past education model was simply an apprenticeship type of position where residents would come, they'd start out very slow, they'd gradually learn, be punished along the way, be rewarded if they did well, and at the end of 6 years would actually be able to graduate and get out there. I would say that this old, we have sound on this?
Now you just lie still, old fellow.
Old method is way out of date, and here's an example up at OHSU of how we're teaching on the wards.
Examine his abdomen. Take that grubby fist away. The first rule of diagnosis, gentlemen, eyes first and most, hands next and least, and tongue not at all. Look! Have you looked?
Yes, sir.
See anything?
No, sir.
Very good, carry on. Gently, man, gently, you're not making bread. Don't forget to be a successful surgeon. You'll need the eye of a hawk, the heart of a lion, and the hands of a lady. You found it?
Yes, sir.
Well, what is it?
A lump.
Well, what do you make of it? Is it kidney? Is it spleen? Is it liver? Is it dangerous? No, don't worry, my good man. You won't understand our medical talk. You, what are we going to do about it? Cut it out, man. Cut it out. And where shall we make the incision? Nothing like large enough. Keyhole surgery. Damnable. Couldn't see anything. Like this. Now, don't worry. This is nothing whatever to do with you.
Anyway, I think that kind of encapsulates well, in a satirical way, obviously, some of the problems with the traditional medical system. So I think it's clear that this ancient model is not viable today in the day of rapidly accelerating technology, cost-effectiveness issues, resident work week restrictions, and even the attitudes of current trainees, which just simply won't take that kind of abuse anymore. So how about the rapid evolution of surgery? I wanted to briefly look back into the past on this. James Tonson cited laparoscopic surgery as one of the great advances of our time in surgery. And if you look at these faces here, I think you all recognize introducers of laparoscopic cholecystectomy some 20 years ago. These were all community-based surgeons. None of these were academic people at all. So innovation since that day, 20 years ago, has really been coming from the working surgeon, the guy that's out there in the community and in non-academic environments. I think community perception is important, and we talked about the priorities of the academic medical center, and once again, they're laudable priorities, but I think the way the community perceives them as perhaps as in decreasing importance, that maybe the academic medical center is too focused on education, too focused on research, and not focused enough on clinical excellence. We know that this is an increasingly important element. This is from the well-known Institute of Medicine report that says safety, effectiveness, patient-centeredness, timeliness, efficiency, and equity, and it asserts as those improvements cannot be achieved within the constraints of the existing system of care, and obviously specifically relating to our education system and the way we do academic medicine. I think the community is a little bit concerned about the emphasis on education. They know that education means a learning curve, and they're becoming increasingly sensitive that complication rates are higher in somebody in their learning curve. So I think we need to take measures of that, and I'm concerned that our academic medical centers maybe forget about this in trying to maintain their educational mandate. I think there's some perception in the community that there's an ivory tower attitude, and this can be very detrimental. And I think it's unfair anymore. We know that there's improved clinical outcomes related to volume, but these high volume tertiary cases are no longer the exclusive franchise of the university system. Large hospitals and major communities do amazing transplant, advanced laparoscopic surgery, and other surgeries. So I would propose, Mr. Chairman, a new paradigm, non-university academic medical centers, vertically integrated with a shift in priorities, putting clinical excellence #1, education and research at slightly lower priorities, streamline relatively as much as we can administrative structures, competitiveness in the healthcare marketplace, and totally integrated into the community and region. Now I want to draw attention, we talked about the ivory tower, and I want you all to remember July 4th, 1789, and the script on the bottom of this says, "Chateau burning as their owners flee, summer 1789." This is the French Revolution, of course, and the ivory towers took a big hit at that time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Swanstrom. We're going to see how compelling your argument is. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll ask you to vote again. Remember number 1. We can bring up.
We're going to have the second one.
No, we vote after each one. Yeah. No, wait till after. Okay, sorry. We'll wait till after each one then.
We'll say. That's right. So our next speaker is Nat Soper, the current chair of surgery at Northwestern in Chicago, and a past president of SAGES. Nat?
Thank you very much. Lee, you ignorant slut. I believe that I can convince all of you, any one of you in the crowd that has voted against the Academic Medical Center, to get back on board. Can I have my first slide, please? And I'll take the priority of the podium to say I'll take my 2-minute rebuttal during this talk and get a couple extra minutes out of it. My disclosure slide is this. I am in a major academic medical center, and therefore I do have some vested interest in this debate. So although Lee tried to change the definition of an academic medical center to try and fit with his discussion, I think we really need to go back to what is an academic medical center. There are 129 medical schools in the United States, and the medical center, or academic medical center, refers to the medical schools along with their affiliated hospitals, clinics, and other patient care facilities. The mission of these academic medical centers are shown here. As we all know, clinical care, education, research, and community service, I might add. There are a number of current challenges, including financial pressures, many of which have been brought about the Balanced Budget Act of 1997, where about $110 billion has been squeezed out of the system, and the direct and indirect medical education amounts has been cut by about 1/3. There are decreased professional and facility payments, increased numbers of uninsured or underinsured, and spiraling costs of health care. These are all things that we know. The current challenges also include quality and safety related to that IOM report, oversight by multiple and conflicting organizations, the efficiency or lack thereof, and educational challenges, where the care is going to be given, decreased length of stay for education, etc. So how are academic medical centers doing? And I'm going to talk economically, operationally, functionally, and in a bid to lead innovation and discovery. The financial performance of academic medical centers, we've had to adopt a business-oriented approach and a cost-attentive attitude to what we do. However, most academic medical centers are in the black, with health system margins in most areas between 5% and 7%. And to try and get away from the traditional horizontal integration, we're developing centers and institutes around types of disease. It does take a little bit of a shift of priorities and that sort of thing, but I think it's important. Now, of all hospitals that are rated by Moody's, and this is to be able to get loans and that sort of thing, so academic medical centers are rated. Of all Moody-rated hospitals and healthcare systems, 16% are academic medical centers, of which 26% are AA rated. Or of all the AA rated hospital systems, and that's the highest rating of Moody's, 26% are academic medical centers, and there's a much higher percentage of AA ratings for academic medical centers than non-academic medical hospital systems. From a year ago till today, 19% of the academic medical centers have been upgraded in their rating, 76% have maintained their rating, and only 5%, in fact, have been downgraded over this most recent period of time. NIH funding is a problem. We all know that. The funding doubled from '98 to 2003 and has now stayed essentially flat. Because of our current president, we now spend about $1,600 per capita for the defense budget versus $97 per capita for biomedical research. And the budget of the entire NIH is about $29 billion, which is much less than investments by the pharma industry. However, through the NIH, there are now the new roadmap and CTSA programs to drive clinically applicable research and not just the basic science stuff. NIH funding, what about academic versus non-academic medical centers? In 2007, 52,000 grants were awarded, of which 85% went to academic medical centers and only 15% to non-academic medical centers. And thus far, 25 of the clinical and translational science awards have been given. 85%, of the 25 that have been awarded to date, all 25 have been awarded to academic medical centers. And I might add that this program, the CTSA, is made to embrace the community and actually outsource for clinical outcomes research things from these ivory towers to the surrounding communities and medical systems around them. What about reputations of hospitals, Dr. Swanstrom? Between academic and non-academic medical centers, we all look at U.S. News and World Report, and this year the honor roll of 18 institutions cited, which had high scores in more than 6 specialties, all 18 are academic medical centers. What about Leapfrog, the group that looks at how processes are being done in hospitals? What about academic versus non-academic? 33 hospitals were cited for boosting safety standards, etc. And of these, 24 or 73% are academic medical centers. What about quality of care in these teaching hospitals? There was a large meta-analysis looking at a number of studies of safety and quality in hospitals. Teaching hospitals had better quality measures, better process measures, a lower risk-adjusted mortality, and major teaching hospitals had better outcomes than minor teaching hospitals. All pretty good for these inefficient medical centers, I would say. There's another unique capability of academic medical centers that happens at virtually no other place. There's a cycle of innovation that's then tested internally within the academic medical center and validated. Then it's exported for assessment at other places. And a really good example is the so-called Lighthouse project that was published by Peter Pronovost last year or 2 years ago about the intervention to decrease catheter-related bloodstream infections with central lines in the ICUs, where his program was brought to all hospitals in the state of Michigan and drove the line sepsis rate to nearly 0. So academic medicine has the ability to do this, and it is almost not possible to do at anything other than an academic medical center. And this is despite the fact that teaching hospitals bear the brunt of unfunded charity or health care in the United States. Although only 6% of all hospitals are the so-called cough hospitals, 44%, nearly half of total charity care is delivered by academic medical centers. And I would suggest that this too is a community benefit and might help break down the town-gown frictions. Teaching hospitals' unique contributions, therefore, are measurably better quality of care, better or equivalent process quality. Major teaching hospitals deliver better outcomes, and teaching hospitals play a vital role in delivering almost half of the nation's care for the uninsured in the United States. Furthermore, academic medicine is the nation's source of research and development for evidence-based care and innovative improvement strategies. What about innovation and discovery? Yes, you said that of all of the things that have happened in terms of innovation in surgery over the last 50 years, there was in fact one of these that was derived from the private sector. However, academic medical centers traditionally have been the primary site of medical innovation, NIH funding, industry funding, etc. And many formal programs in medical innovation have sprung up around the United States, virtually all of which are in academic medical centers, and I'd bring up the programs at Hopkins, Stanford, and Northwestern, where we just instituted the so-called NUvention program, which brings together a number of disparate groups that would never happen in a non-academic center, such as the law school, the business school, biomedical engineering, and the medical school, to try to drive technological innovation. In bringing it a little bit closer to home, how about the Young Researcher Awards of SAGES? These are awarded to the young researcher or innovator, if you will, who has distinguished him or herself early in the career. Thus far, 14 individuals have been awarded with this honor, and all 14 are from academic medical centers. All 14 remain in academic medical centers. What about the no-scar grants? This is another area of innovation today, and I would say maybe parallel to the Lap-Coley revolution. As we all know, there have been about $2 million in funding that have been given to the no-scar grants around the United States and internationally for this notes-related research. And of the 36 awards given out thus far, all but 2 have gone to AMC individuals. So in conclusion, therefore, I would say, is the academic medical center failing? Well, I think all U.S. medical centers today are struggling financially because of what Congress has done to us and the dysfunctional financing system that we have for the system today. However, economically, academic medical centers are doing about the same. Operationally, we're taking great care of patients and the measures are in place. And in innovation and discovery, this is still the place to go. Thank you very much.
Nat. Very compelling, Dr. Soper. Dr. Swanstrom, you have 2 minutes for rebuttal, and then we'll have our vote again.
Well, Nat, I think that was very elegant, but and I'm very happy that the AMCs are starting to catch up to the community leaders. And I think it also points out that perhaps there's a little bias in some of the grant awards more than justified winnings. But no, I think that was well put, and as you know, I consider myself a fairly academic guy as well. Was I one of the 2 no-scar things? But you do put together a good thing. I mean, there is concern out there that academic medical centers are failing. I think people worry about that, actually. And we hope that it's not true, but and we also hope that there is no bias in the system. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the 2 debaters. We ask you now to take your audience response system keypads. We're going to flash up the choices for you again and to see if they have swayed you at all, and then we'll show these at the end. Is that correct, Mr. Moderator? So is the academic medical center failing? Press 1 if you believe yes, it is. Press 2 if you believe no, it is not failing.
While you're voting, if you have questions for either of our debaters, the microphones are open, and we'll have probably about 5 minutes so we could entertain them in either rebuttal of your own or healthy questioning. Dr. Marks.
Forgive me, but there was so much unsaid yesterday afternoon. Nat, you said it beautifully. You told us all about the new glory of the medical centers, and of course, Lee thanked you and commented that it's good that things were getting better. Just have to remind ourselves that flexible endoscopy began in the community hospitals, as did endoscopic surgery.
Every once in a while, lightning strikes twice. However, the majority of those strikes have occurred on medical centers. Clearly, though, the innovation is not the sole domain of the academic medical center, and loath would I be to try and state that that is the case, because certainly interactions here with individuals from around the world, many of whom are not at academic medical centers, I think some of the most brilliant ideas are being incubated at other locations. So we certainly don't hold a monopoly on that.
Dr. Fink.
Well, I want to follow up on Nat's comment. Actually, it's very timely. And I wonder if we ought to reframe the question, not whether one group of centers or the other are failing, but more importantly for everybody in this room, in the society, and in our medical culture, is what can each of the group of medical centers learn from each other? And I think that may be the point where the debate might be more focused. So I'd love to hear your comments in that regard.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that, Aaron. And I think really the core of this debate is kind of a perception issue versus a reality issue, and that it would be good to begin to break down that perception that there's a divorce between the two, the community physician and the academic physician, and the community hospital and the academic hospital. We really need to down that barrier because we're all in trouble. You got to face it, and it's time to partner up and team up and work together. I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I agree. And we as surgeons, particularly, and other procedural-based specialties, need to be heard. We need to be organized in some way so that we can go to the government and other payers and things and really allow us to succeed, because right now the biggest pressures that are being put to bear are financial, and a lot of it is ridiculous stuff that we need to fight for.
Are there any other comments from the audience on this important issue?
I've got a question for both of our debaters. Dr. Soper, you pointed out that the Academic Medical Center bears more than their, quote, fair share of indigent and unfunded care. Is that a role for the academic medical centers to maintain? Is it politically wise to do so? Or should the academic medical center, in order to maintain its financial health, be making efforts to have a more equitable balance of unfunded care across the community? Well,
Again, I think considering the finances of the system, I think ultimately there's going to need to be a more equitable distribution of some of those cases. I think what we're going to see in a number of major metropolitan centers is some of the, quote, charity hospitals are going to fold, and then those additional patients are going to end up being driven into the other medical centers in town, and it could have a domino effect. But clearly, you know, I think we all need to bear some of the price, and it needs to be somewhat more equitable, particularly if what was traditionally an advantage of the academic medical center, getting the direct and indirect educational funds from the government, if that's drying up, then I think the rules need to change.
Yeah, and I would have to agree with that from my standpoint as well. I work at a tertiary care teaching hospital, and as John knows, in Portland, one of the rapidly gaining market leaders is a posh private hospital that's it's not for profit, but kind of acts that way, and it's really hard to compete with them because we do have a lot of the charity care and shoulder the burden of education as well. I think we educate physicians for society, and yet society penalizes us in some ways when it comes to where they want to go have their surgery.
Okay, I want to thank very much our two debaters for leading us off, and thank you so much. Well, are we going to see the vote now, or are we going to see the vote afterwards? Let's see the
Adrian wants to do it afterwards.
We want to do it afterwards to keep you enticed, keep you here so you don't know what the vote is, you see.
So our next topic here is the statement, surgeons should be paid to take call. With inconvenience comes compensation. So before we have Dr. Stiegmann lead off, we need to vote as to whether surgeons should be paid to take call or whether our profession requires taking call for free, so to speak. Okay. So Dr. Greg Stiegmann, past president of SAGES and vice president, I believe, of the University of Colorado Health System. Greg.
Thank you, Dr. Hunter. Thank you for the privilege of being here today. If I can have my slides, please. I'll first want to commence by extending my deep sympathy to my opponent, Dr. Burkett, and ask him to take nothing that I have to say personally. What I'm going to do today is present you some facts that I think you will agree are almost self-evident, and we'll then walk through some of the nuances of the changes that have occurred over the last decade or two that have made the conclusion that you will come away with almost inevitably that surgeons should be paid to take call. Let's start by looking at the fact that tectonic forces have reshaped American surgery and the delivery of trauma and emergency care over the past 60 years. I think it's unarguable that surgeons today practice in a different way than they did 40 years ago. Most of us are now in narrowly focused, rather specialty areas, such as GI surgery, endocrine surgery, breast surgery, bariatric surgery, laparoscopic surgery, and so forth. And over the last 10 or 20 years, trauma and emergency surgery has evolved into its own specialty area. Moreover, if you cover call in an emergency department that has any sort of trauma designation, you have to have special qualifications. At the very least, advanced trauma life support certification. And you have to obtain a specific number of CME trauma credits every year to maintain yourself in that position. Now, I will concede that surgeons do have a responsibility to provide off-hours coverage for patients that we have operated on and are otherwise under our care. This is long-standing. This is the concept of the itinerant surgeon. And while almost every one of you in this audience probably did a big case on Monday and then left town, you're not an itinerant surgeon because your associates, your partners are there looking after your patients. I agree we need to do that. On the other hand, I do not believe that we have a responsibility under normal circumstances to provide services to patients that we have never seen or never treated. And I would submit to you that anyone who holds those views is very similar to Don Quixote from La Mancha and his small partner Sancho. And over the next few slides, I'll convince you that. Let's first start by looking at the emergency department. Emergency departments did not exist as we know them now until the late 1960s. It was only in the 1970s that 24/7 MD coverage began to occur around the United States. Emergency medicine itself arose as a specialty in the late 80s and was not approved by the American Board of Medical Specialties until 1992. Trauma center designations only began to appear in the mid-70s and still are evolving in many areas. Well, what about surgeons? In the 1960s and 1980s, maybe 1990s, I know surgeons who actually worked in the ED to build a practice, cover their partners sometime, or to supplement their income. But by 1992, with the introduction of RBRVS, as we look backwards, that was the date that surgery became a commodity. Couple that with a variety of malpractice crises, one in the 70s, another in the 80s, another in the early part of this century, and now, recognized by about mid-1990, the shortage of our specialty has developed and is in fact increasing. Well, what about emergency departments and their hospitals? Let's look at some facts. From 1993 to 2003, the demand for emergency care in the United States grew by 26%. During that same time period, the number of emergency departments across the United States declined by 425. And during that same time, 198,000 hospital beds were taken out of service. Now let's look at our economics, many of these which you're personally familiar. Over the last 20 years, in terms of actual or real dollars, we have experienced declining reimbursement for professional services. Now, to compensate for that, most surgeons have increased their caseload just to stay even, or in many cases, to roll backward only a little bit. We've seen massive spikes in malpractice premiums, and we know that over the last 10 years, much trauma has evolved from operative to non-operative. And further, and unfortunately, we know that many, if not most, patients in our EDs are uninsured. Well, let's take a look at law, in this case, federal law, and bylaws, your hospital bylaws. The Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act was passed in 1986 as part of the Omnibus Reconciliation Bill. That law has greatly impacted surgeons. It offers major fines, both to hospitals and to individual surgeons for violations, usually violations comprised of not showing up to do what you're supposed to do as a specialist when you're called. What is little known is the fact that EMTALA does not require specialty emergency department coverage. Your hospital is bound under its participation agreement with Medicare to provide that coverage, and that, in fact, is the regulator of the hospitals needing specialists for call coverage in their emergency department. So, to compensate for that, hospitals recognizing that they could not participate in Medicare without specialists on call for their ED simply required call coverage as an obligation of medical staff membership. Well, what's happened with the economics? Both Medicare and managed care have brutally cut reimbursement for all of us. That includes PCPs, and most, if not many of them, won't see indigent patients, and in Colorado at least, more than half of the primary care doctors will not see new Medicaid or Medicare patients. Ergo, emergency departments have become the de facto primary care clinics in metropolitan areas. Now, the surgeon who's ramped up his business just to stay afloat is being called to the ED. It's disrupting his busy elective OR schedules, and it's disrupting his office hours. Couple that with the 80-hour work week, which has been around in most places about 4 or 5 years now, in some places a bit longer. Residents, we know, can't work any more than 80 hours a week. They can't stay in the hospital more than 30 hours at a time. And what's the reason for this? Well, many data now attribute to the fact that fatigued residents, and by inference, fatigued surgeons, endanger patient safety. So a question that we all must ask, is it advisable for an attending surgeon to do elective operations after being on call? Or does he or she, in fact, risk the judgment that is inevitable, that because he or she is fatigued, they have contributed to substandard care? Let's then summarize with the current picture. Hospitals are required by Medicare to provide on-call specialty services. The EMTALA regulations govern the provision of these services. We all know that modern emergency departments are staffed by emergency department specialists, usually paid for by the hospital in addition to their professional fees. Many general surgeons are now specialized and are not comfortable, and in many cases not qualified, to deal with trauma and emergency surgery. Work hour restrictions for residents have broad implications not only for the residents but for the attending surgeons thinking about what they're going to do the next day. And finally, surgeons are in short supply. Surgical care is now a commodity. Professional fee reimbursement in many cases barely covers the cost of practice. And we know from various studies that litigation more frequently arises from trauma and emergency surgery than from elective operations. Well, what's the American College position? This is hard to read, but the college thinks we ought to take call. But I call your attention to the bottom line. And the college believes that coordinated, skilled, optimal care can be delivered only if the healthcare organizations commit the necessary resources and support, and appropriate reimbursement is provided by insurers and other responsible agencies. Well, what in fact is happening around the country? Let's look at Oregon as an example. 56 hospitals in Oregon with emergency departments were recently surveyed. 43% of those hospitals provide a stipend for at least one specialty to be on call for their emergency departments. Another 31% guarantee pay for uninsured patients while treated on call. And the average stipend for one night of call is $1,000. The final arbiter, the Department of Health and Human Services Office of the Inspector General, late in 2007, issued a dictum saying paying for call services doesn't violate any statutes. Praise the Lord, because hospitals around Denver have been doing this for many years. All you have to do is make sure per diem rates meet the fair market value test. And in addition to being paid a stipend for being on call, you can collect your pro fees, no problem. So how do we conclude? I think it is irrefutable that surgeons are responsible for call coverage for patients that we have treated, morally and ethically. On the other hand, hospitals are responsible for specialty call coverage for their emergency departments as a component of their participation in the Medicare program. And the inescapable conclusion, surgeons that cover trauma and emergency call should be compensated. Conclusion number 2. Although my opponent is altruistic, beneficent, charitable, humane, hospitable, indulgent, kind-hearted, and all those nice adjectives you see, he is just plain wrong in the context of surgery in the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Stiegmann. Very compelling. To debate the negative, we'll call on Dr. Desmond Burkett from the Leahy Clinic. Dr. Burkett. Remember, you do have to vote after this debate again.
Well, Dr. Stiegmann, I greatly respect you, but I'm glad to see that you still agree that I ride horses, and you had me up there riding a horse. I have one disclosure, and that is that I do take emergency call. I take it as general surgery call and trauma call. But my disclosure is I don't get paid for it because I'm in a system that doesn't pay for it. But that doesn't mean why I necessarily argue against Dr. Stiegmann, who I think has got this wrong. He's just going for the quick fix, and it's flawed. I urge you to vote no on this because it's the only sensible thing to do. Much that I respect him, he's just got it wrong. The rationale, well, general surgeons are becoming specialists, we know that. They're uncomfortable covering trauma and uncomfortable covering emergencies. They're unwilling to cover the ER. We're also getting to the age, as he said, that people are tired, feel the next day, feel that they can't perform, and that it's unreasonable to expect their patients to be operated on by tired people. They have a responsibility to their patients, and they're unwilling to cover. Covering the emergency room interferes with seeing patients in the office. God forbid that you should be disturbed to go and see someone and have your regular, nice schedule altered, and the same with the operating room. They say there are primary responsibilities to their own patients. It's an intrusion on the orderly way of life that Dr. Stiegmann wants to protect, and they're uncomfortable in covering the the ER. Now, the other one is a generational lifestyle. Remember that a lot of people in this room, and as I look around, probably less than I originally thought, were brought up in the era that it was their way of life to cover the emergency room. It's just the way we were brought up. But there are generational changes that have been brought about by the 80-hour work week. More time in the family, wanting to do other things, intrusion into an orderly lifestyle, all very laudable reasons, and uncomfortable again. Well, what is the administrator's recourse? Pay the surgeons to cover the emergency room. Easy, quick fix. Bribery. Bribing surgeons who don't want to do it because of the things I've told you. They don't want to do it because they feel uncomfortable covering these patients. They don't want to do it for lifestyle reasons. It's a quick, easy fix. But once there's money on the table, money wins. We all know that. And of course, that's the thing. Dr. Stiegmann is just advocating money on the table to get them to accept. And of course, the surgeons accept happily. They throw complaints and principles and lifestyles to the wind. It's hypocrisy, it's bribery. Now the issues, double dipping, being paid to cover, billing the patients for services. I agree some are going to be free care. Surgeons in the driving seat, they can up the ante. They can turn around a few weeks later and say, hey, we're not going to cover. We demand more money. Strains the system. causes the system to fail and break down. This is all just the surgeon in the driving seat. It's not solving the problem. Bribery is not the answer. Change is the answer. And Dr. Stiegmann's not prepared for change. This is the Stiegmann solution. Don't listen to the problems. Don't look at the problems. Don't discuss the problems. Just pay up. There's nothing more permanent than change, said 25 centuries ago. So let's change. We want a change that is going to redraw the lines for general surgery. This is the way to do it, not just pay. Other disciplines have poached from general surgeons. We've become specialists, and changes we hardly notice are going on, refusing to cover lifestyle, all these changes. There's something didn't come up there. Surgeons, the solution is to have, yes, there we are, redraw the lines completely, create a trauma and emergency surgeon service, not just get general surgeons who don't want to do it to cover it, by bribing them. These people would treat acute appendicitis, cholecystitis, perforations, etc., and general surgeons could cover if they wanted to. This has been started in the Northwest and needs to go across the country as general surgery changes and we become specialists. A specialty with surgeons who desire to do this work, not those that don't want to do it but get paid by Dr. Stiegmann to do it and put all their principles to the wind just to do it because there's more money in their pocket. They are available for the ER. There'll be faster response to the ER. There'll be more rapid treatment of the patients and a more efficient operating room. Patients will be better satisfied and the public would have a better perception of the whole system. Now, you all remember from Aesop's Fables, the hare and the tortoise. Well, the hare has spoke a little while ago. That was his quick fix. Just quickly run to the winning post, fall asleep on the way, not really think it out. But the old tortoise has a new discipline, thinks it's out properly, and just plods to the end and gets it right. So I urge you, vote no. He's wrong. With my due respects to Dr. Stiegmann.
Very compelling, Dr. Burkett. Dr. Stiegmann, you have 2 minutes for rebuttal if you choose to use it.
I expected and was not disappointed by Professor Burkett's eloquent response and his loquacious referrals to pre-Christian authors, philosophers, and other erudite individuals. Now, in point of fact, I would concede that, to my amazement, this Quixotish figure riding his broken down horse, otherwise disguised as a turtle, has actually come to some sense, quite in contrast to the literary comparison that I am using for him. The development of a trauma emergency care specialty I think does have excellent long-term merit. It's well underway. We have one currently going on in our system, and as last I understood, the number of applicants for the number of available positions was substantially in dissonance, and it was in a positive direction. We had a number of applicants for that. So that is the perfect solution, and in fact, that may well be what we come to. On the other hand, if you're in a smaller community and you are burdened by these interruptions to your lifestyle, and I think I'm a baby boomer, not a Wire or an Xer or whatever the newest one is, I think it's unarguable that surgeons want to live and carry on a little more normally than some of my teachers thought was appropriate. And so I think we ought to aim for a conclusion that merges Dr. Burkett's long-term solution, which will be tortoise-like, I agree, with my short-term solution, and we come out with a win-win situation for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stiegmann. Before we re-vote on this issue, is there anyone in the audience who wants to add to this debate any compelling arguments for or against? You have an opportunity to come to the microphone before we vote. Please state your name and where you're from.
From Florida.
Antonio, in my experience, many of the places that have a trauma and emergency service pay their attending surgeons for call coverage to the tune of somewhere around $1,700 a night. I just didn't know if that was prevalent in other institutions as well.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Front microphone.
But my question is the same line. If somebody takes only emergency call and trauma surgery in this day and age, do you think he can survive without any hospital reimbursement?
Yes, sir.
Do you want to embellish that?
Vote no.
And I am asking that questions taking without staff call without pay 42 years. I don't think so.
Okay. Microphone over here, please. State your name and where you're from.
Jim McGreevy from St. Paul, Minnesota. I enjoyed both those talks, but it just seems to me that you're both arguing the same thing. One way or another, we're still paying for the surgeon to take the coverage, and that's, I mean, I think that's appropriate. If you're going to put the time in, you're going to do the work, that you get reimbursed for it. And if that's for a person that's designated to do that particular job, as opposed to somebody has to break their clinical schedule to do it, it still seems that and the end result is you're going to pay the person to do that coverage. Is that not true?
No, I think that is exactly the case, and the point that I tried to make is that surgery now, in most cases, is a commodity. And so if it's a commodity, then we should treat it as such, and that's exactly what's doing. Economics 101 still works.
I would agree with you, but you see, that wasn't the question that was posed. The question that was posed, should general surgeons be paid for covering the emergency room? And the answer is no. But what you and I are talking about is correct. That's why you vote no on this question, because you're all distorting what was put up on the thing, which was, should general surgeons be paid to cover the emergency room? Well, the answer to that is no. That's just the big Hare's quick fix.
That was a great response, Hillary.
Well, I'd like to ask both of you, I know we're talking about general surgeons, but should neurosurgeons be paid to cover the emergency department? I'd like your response to that.
Well, if you're going to, if this specialty comes in a big way, which people are talking about, then those surgeons who do it are going to be doing a certain amount of neurosurgical work, the simpler ones, and are also going to be doing some orthopedic stuff, the simpler orthopedic stuff. So that the neurosurgeons and the orthopedic surgeons then become a consultative service, and they're going to do the bigger cases. And the answer is no, they shouldn't. They then become consultative, and they should not be paid.
Well, I disagree respectfully, of course. The fact is that neurosurgeons were among the leaders in this movement because there is a relative shortage of neurosurgeons. And Dr. Burkett is correct. This new specialist is going to be trained to do a burr hole. Now, frankly, if I were having a burr hole, I would rather have one done by a neurosurgeon, but if it were life or death, I might prefer the latter. But neurosurgeons and other specialists deserve it.
But I think that's the issue, is there are, I mean, in Massachusetts, they were going to put up a sign that said, when you got just past Worcester, the next neurosurgeon is in Albany. Don't drive safely. Now, that's the issue. Do you want to have your burr hole done by someone who has been taught to do burr holes, or wait for the neurosurgeon to drive 60, 70, 80, 90 miles? To me, no, I'd prefer to be around the next day.
There's a question from the back microphone.
Uday Marion, Illinois. It seems to me that the problem with emergency room call coverage is super specialization and having too many specialists in the field of general surgery. So I question the wisdom of creating another specialty to fix the problem of too many specialists. How many specialists are you going to create, and can you cover all the emergency departments with this new super specialty of emergency surgery?
Dr. Burkett?
Well, I think that we're creating specialists now. I mean, quite a few of us don't do certain things. I'm in an institution where I'm not allowed to do colorectal stuff unless it's an emergency. Then I can do one. Well, that's crazy. So we're into super specialists right now. And I think as general surgeons, we're just not prepared to admit it. And I think that we've got to start facing the way medicine's going.
Two quick comments from the microphones. Front microphone.
Yeah, it's Asirga, Newark, Delaware. Listening to Dr. Burkett, I'm wondering why a general surgeon is paid at all to do any work. Why are we paying them? Why shouldn't just do the work voluntarily from the get-go? That's what I wonder. And the discussion to me should be, should hospitals force general surgeons to take ER call in order to be credentialed to work there? That should be the issue we should be discussing, which I think is more important. And then the surgeons could decide whether they want to cover the emergency room or not.
Well, I agree with you. We should be billing patients, absolutely. I don't want to do it for nothing, for heaven's sakes. But to be paid to do something by the hospital when you don't want to cover the emergency room is not the way to do it. It's to have people who are going to get paid by insurance companies who want to do that particular type of work.
Final comment before we revote.
Mayor Sidabagai from Los Angeles. I work in a city, and I will say that in our hospital, every subspecialty gets paid for call except for general surgery, OBGYN, neurosurgery, pediatrics, everyone. And I will say that in our demographics, 30 to 40% of our patients are non-paying self-pay patients. So with due respect, Dr. Burkett, I do want to get paid for the work I do, but when the patients don't pay and the insurance company doesn't pay and the hospital makes money, I think it's the hospital's responsibility to pay me. Someone has to pay. I'm not going to work for free. And I appreciate SAGES actually having a session about this because it's a really important thing that we're being faced, and we're the only passive ones in the field that aren't doing anything about it.
I agree you should get paid, but you shouldn't. I agree entirely you should get paid, but you shouldn't be just taking call and getting paid. There should be the hospital, or that this profession should reorganize things for a specialty, and that the hospital works out how they're going to cover that specialty and how that person's going to get reimbursed.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you then, we'll bring up the audience response system vote. And we'll ask you to re-vote at this time. Should surgeons be paid to take call? 1 is yes, 2 is no. Please vote now. And again, we'll see the votes at the end of the complete session, so stick around.
So we're going to take a break in moderators at this point because it's considered unethical for me to moderate my own debate. President Gerald Marks and President George Bursey will ascend to the podium to moderate this next debate.
Dr. Marks, Dr. Bursey, please come forward.
referring to me, George, because of my youth?
Yes.
I have the pleasure of introducing Stephen Wexner, who will address the topic, "The words from your pen belong to you and not some bloody large publishing house."
Okay, and ladies and gentlemen, remember we will vote with the audience response system prior to our debaters. Do the words from your pen belong to you? The words that you write. 1 is yes, 2 is no. Has to do with copyright issues, publication issues. Vote now.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you to the other moderators as well, and to Adrian Park for inviting me. I'm not sure who to thank for the title, which I didn't choose for this particular debate. I would probably have changed the title somewhat. We've just heard how perhaps surgeons should volunteer to take emergency call, maybe volunteer for their entire surgical practice, and now we're being asked, should surgeons also volunteer all of their intellectual property? So we volunteer our time while we're operating, we volunteer our time while we're taking call, and we perhaps should also volunteer our time while we're at home with our families and at weekends and on vacation, on airplanes, doing all of our academic work. That also should be volunteer time. So I would change the title to "Publishers Lead a Charmed Existence." And if you think about other sectors of industry, imagine what it would be like if you ran a grocery store and the farmer gave you his food for free. And then, as we have editorial boards on all our journals, some of your employees worked free. A large segment of middle management just volunteered to work in your shop. So your food came free, your inventory was given free. Imagine Home Depot. If lumber mills just delivered stuff, there's no charge. Of course there's no charge. We do this because we want people to recognize our name. Or perhaps closer to home might be something like recording companies. Can you imagine for a minute if musicians said, well, we'll donate this because, yes, we'll get name recognition, and more people will attend our concerts, and we'll make money on that end. So our stock will go up because people will understand who we are. But please do take these materials we've done in the recording studio for free, sell them, get what you like for them. And then other musicians would volunteer and sit around and edit the things and make sure they all were perfect for the label, who would then sell it purely at their profit. Or perhaps closer to home, there's surgical intellectual property, wherein an inventor comes up with an idea, and although in years gone by people did donate ideas, in this day and age, when we look through the disclosures in this very meeting, there are many, many people who have intellectual property, and I dare say it is not being given for free to the corporate sponsors of the meeting, much as we might appreciate them. And perhaps even closest to home, dealing with publishers, what about other writers, authors of fiction and nonfiction? I mean, do we think that the authors we see when we're going to leave and go to Philadelphia Airport, all those books, they donate their time and they donate their intellectual property to the publishers? I think not. And I guess my disclosure for this session would be that for 25 years, I have donated my time to publishing houses. I have written many manuscripts, I've written many textbooks, and work has been donated to the publishers. My other disclosures, I've served on over 24 editorial boards and donated my time on that end as well, doing peer reviews, several per week, even at the current clip, and going to editorial board meetings. However, I'll give you some fact along with what I've just said. If I can get the slides up, please. I will also give you, in addition to parallels, the disclosure I just gave you. But what is intellectual property? I referred to it in my introduction a couple of times. Intellectual property constitutes creations of the mind, inventions, whether literary or artistic, symbols, names, images, or designs used in commerce as defined by the World Intellectual Property Organization. There's industrial property, which might be patents, and that also does apply to us in surgery, trademarks and designs, and there's copyright, like literature, music, and art, with pretty much with the exception of the field of medicine and science, is done for profit motive, or at least, if not done for profit motive, may, as a byproduct, generate some profit. Patent law generally gives the owner a monopoly over the idea for about 20 years, and it promotes publication of useful ideas at the price of giving the author temporary monopoly over these ideas. Copyright law covers the actual format of the work for many, many years after the death of the author. So your estate would actually retain rights to your publication, and those rights could be distributed only upon the estate authorizing it, which could be art or could be other types of material fixed in a tangible medium. Even if it's saved on a hard drive or printed, it is considered copyright. For scientists, publishing has had a unique impetus, if you will, to disseminate new ideas and to stimulate further advances within the field. And as I mentioned when I was speaking about recording artists, to promote career advancement. So you could say that, well, we publish because ultimately we're going to be better known and people will come see us, but that's the same argument as, you know, why doesn't the recording artist give his work or her work for free to the label, hoping people will come to the concert later? For publishing companies, they get the archive of literature with quality controls such as peer review, again, for free. So inventory is free and the review process is free. And then on the other side, they charge for subscription. What a great racket. We donate our time, we donate our ideas, we donate our energy, and we then review each other's work at home and in editorial board meetings. And at the end of that, the publisher derives all of the profit and some revenue from advertisement as well. Large amounts of revenue. So revenue for the publisher comes from the advertising, as well as purchasing of reprints, as well as subscriptions, and the inventory is free. And much of the associated work product is free. How did this start? The first journal was born January 5th, 1665. It was a 12-page pamphlet, the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London. It was the first, at least English-speaking scientific journal, and it's a curiosity item that Dr. Paula Denoya, who was helping me put this together, actually came across a copy. This thing is, I mean, not an original, obviously, but it still is being published. That was the start of where we began. Journals enabled researchers to quickly share work. This was something that in the days prior to the internet was very important, and authors really didn't expect any intrinsic rewards in science. But if your only medium was a 12-page booklet 400 years ago, I'm not sure what else you would expect. And at that time, journals could not afford to pay. And I think that's an important historical point. There was also no other avenue at the time available for sharing work. However, authors quickly said, well, sure, the publishers don't have much money. We want our ideas known. There's no internet. There's no airplanes to get us to other countries to meetings. You know, the only way we're going to get ideas out is putting them in print and sending that print to remote places so that people can learn what we have done. The paradigm has changed dramatically, obviously, because it's a very global, we heard in Steve Eubank's talk this morning, how global things are, and technology also now allows us to pass on information without a publisher. Authors still publish to advance knowledge and career rather than money, at least in science, and in exchange for peer-reviewed platform, we routinely, as I have done for 25 years, transfer exclusive rights for our work and for any revenue generated from it. We're willing to accept a delay prior to publication, and we're willing to accept that access to our work will to some degree be restricted, less so now with electronic medium, but subscriptions have gone up, the costs have gone up, libraries often can't afford to maintain journal collections, and I'm not sure how many people look at paper, but the paradigm has changed with the internet. So in addition to the volunteer work we do, the publishers then charge page fees to us to have reprints of our own work, which is an absolutely unique situation anywhere in the business world that we get charged back for our own work. They also charge the advertising fees, and institutions limit fair use to about 5 articles over 5 years. And that's, if you look at the serial crisis, research libraries spent 2.7 times more for serials in 1998 to 99 than in 85 to 86, although for that increased money of 270%, they got 6% less serial titles. So we still got paid nothing. The subscription fees went up, and the amount of work product seen in libraries actually went down. So during that time when journal prices increased over 200%, the CPI went up only 68%. So clearly the publishers found a great way to do this. What is the size of the publishing industry? If you look at the scientific and medicine publishing industry, it is a $7 billion industry. It is the fastest growing sector in the media in 2002. And in recent years, most publishers' profits, according to the Journal of the Medical Libraries Association, have averaged 20 to 40%. If we look at market share here in millions of dollars, so you can see the end result there, $2.389 billion in healthcare market, and you can see some of our friends listed there and the size of market share. So you remember that pamphlet in 1665 started with poor publishers and scientists having no way to get their ideas across, donating their time to these poor publishers. Well, I'm not sure $2.4 billion necessarily constitutes anyone being poor. And when you look at the global scientific market players, it's up to $4.5 billion. So we stand here volunteering our time to support a very much alive and healthy for-profit industry whose rate of profit outstrips the consumer price index increase fourfold. Why do we want to retain our rights? Well, we can increase readership and citations, perhaps, if it's free and open access, by allowing web posting via online services without any financial barriers, and we could potentially reuse work, putting it on different sites for people to find. Traditional publishing had exclusivity. On the web, there is the potential to do that in another way with open access publishing. There is a public library of science, there's PubMed, and now there's HighWire. Hundreds of journals now available free of charge. Wow, $4.5 billion going away? People aren't going to sit still for that. It's up to the individual journals how to handle these copyrights. Biomed Central also has some commercial open access journals funded via author-paid article processing fees. So you can pay to have your article published, you retain the copyright. And that's a business decision. It is a risk-benefit ratio. Are you willing to spend $1,700 to $2,700? What are you going to get back for it? As opposed to a peer-reviewed journal. But most open access journals cannot really rely strictly on author fees and get grants or institutional funding. It is clearly a unique paradigm. The publisher gets benefit from everyone, whether you're writing the articles, whether you're reviewing the articles, whether you're advertising in the journals, or whether you're subscribing to the journals. They have a completely free inventory, a partially volunteer workforce, which has allowed them to increase profit 215% to a $4.5 billion market share. We gain no financial benefit. We may gain some career benefit, but in this day and age, with open access and electronic medium, I think it is time to change the paradigm and not to volunteer all of our time and effort so that someone else can derive the exclusive profit. Thank you very much.
We would like to introduce Dr. John Hunter.
Mr. Moderators, my worthy adversary, Dr. Wexler, thank you very much. I think you've done a very eloquent job in creating the case here. I think you've hit the nail on the head right at the end when you said that the cost of putting together an article and putting it up online is somewhere around $2,700, perhaps as high as $5,000. I want to sort of show of hands just at this moment before we take a vote, because we have as to how many people would like to spend $5,000 to put one of their articles up online for free. Okay, all right. So let's move on. So I've paraphrased the debate a little bit to say, who should own the copyright to your words? Well, it's time to have a little fun here. Certainly, we'll see how this goes. I do have a disclosure of a conflict of interest. I am the editor-in-chief of the World Journal of Surgery, and myself and my wife, that would be Laura, who's the managing editor, receive a stipend from Springer on instruction of the International Surgical Society. Why I'll win this debate is pretty clear. I had the longer flight to prepare this talk than Dr. Wexler. Of course, Dr. Wexler had a fellow to prepare his talk for him, so that may even be better. I don't know. I will be so convincing, but I don't think anybody should really be fooled on that one. And because I paid off the moderator to sabotage my opponent's presentation, but clearly I paid off the wrong moderator because it went off very well, I got to say.
So anyway, I'm going to make a few points here. The publisher should own the copyright. Why? The cost of publishing your words is substantial. The publisher couldn't publish otherwise. To avoid self-plagiarism and to avoid chaos in the medical literary field. So let's look through these reasons one at a time. How much does it cost to publish your work? Well, if you work in the business, you realize that there are a large host of people that take your words and convert them into a page in surgical endoscopy. There's the publishing house staff at Springer, the CEO, down to the telephone receptionist, and quite a number of people in between. Outside of that operation, there's a copy editors, and the copy editors are usually working from home all over the country. They spend a lot of time correcting your grammar, your style, your spelling to make it something that people can actually read and understand. Then there's a production editor who's putting it all together to make sure the graphs lined up with your figures, make sure your references are correct. There's a production staff, largely outsourced to India these days, who are actually doing the layout. Then there's the editorial staff, the managing editor who works with the authors, associate editors. The journal, most journals have so many articles these days that it's very hard for a single editor to keep up with it all. And then the editor-in-chief. Production, the online editorial management system, either Scholar One or Editorial Manager, the two largest ones. It's expensive. Marketing, the printer, ink, paper and ink, and postage. If you actually mail the journal, which we still do, it costs up to $50 a year to mail to some locations on the globe. So what is the total cost when you add all that together? Well, it's about $800,000 a year, and this is the cost for the journal that I know the best. If you publish 300 articles a year, which we do, and a surgical endoscopy does about the same, that's $2,600 per article. Very similar to the cost of putting one up in an online access system. So why would a publisher invest this amount of money if you could take the finished product, all the work that they'd put into it, copy it, and republish it online, because that's what you could do if you owned the copyright? They wouldn't do it. So what would it cost if you wanted to do it yourself? And I think Dr. Wexner got into this a little bit, but the cost would be substantial, somewhere between around $2,600, $2,700 at the best, but probably a lot more than that given the economies of scale of the publishing house. What would it cost for a society to do it? Some societies have thought that they would do online desktop publishing, but most societies, once they get into the cost of this, they back away. They go to a publishing house because they can do it cheaper. So the answer to that one is forget about it, as Donnie Brasco once said. So large publishing houses keep down costs by economies of scale. The journals are sold to libraries in bundles and through library consortia, again, decreasing the cost of production, getting your words out there. So is it too soon to hold up your hands, Dr. Wexner? I don't know. The publisher couldn't publish otherwise. The journal article in the public domain, this has been a source of great debate in national circles at the Library of Medicine, the National Institute of Health, where especially for peer-reviewed, for NIH-sponsored research, it's felt by the NIH that open access through PubMed Central is the way that they'd like all publicly funded research to be published. And they really push the publishers very hard on this because, of course, the research there is funded with your tax dollar. The National Library of Medicine, of course, would love to have access to all your work, and so would the public, the press, and every internet search engine, rather than bringing up an abstract, would love to bring up the full text article. So if your words were in the public domain, why would an individual or society buy a subscription? Why would a library buy a journal? How could SAGES profit from their journal if it was all up online for free? How could a publisher cover $800,000 in expenses? None of these things would be possible. To avoid self-plagiarism, well, if you republish your words in a second journal, this is a copyright violation as it stands now. if permission is not requested and granted. If you republish your words in a second journal, it is indeed considered plagiarism. So even if you own the copyright, republication of your work in another journal is still plagiarism. Chaos. Can you imagine each author by himself, herself, or through consortia charging for each download? Imagine the quality of the language if everybody put their own work up. Imagine the quality of the layout. Imagine the quality of the references. Imagine how hard it would be for Google or PubMed to find the important articles. Imagine the amount of crap that you'd have to sort through to find something decent in the literature. So I want to finish in sort of in rebuttal, because I have a couple of minutes built into this, to really talk about some of the things that I knew Dr. Wexner would bring up. So what is the economic value of your words? Your words are worth something. They're worth a royalty. Now, journals don't generally give you a royalty, but books give you a royalty. They're worth academic advancement, salary advancement at one's own institution, recruitment dollar opportunities at other institutions. Patient referrals to the expert often come to those who write the most articles and are acknowledged because of their contributions to the literature. Industry attractiveness, again, thought leaders are often those who publish, and they're attractive to industry for development of their own ideas and for research grants. And again, peer-reviewed grant funding requires publication. So to summarize then, if the publisher to relinquish copyright, the economic model for publication or for publishers would break, the quality of publication would fall, you couldn't find the wheat for the chaff, and chaos would prevail. Now, in rebuttal to some of the arguments made by Dr. Wexner, he used the music industry as an analogous situation. Most copyright to songs are owned by the production house or the music studio, and the musician receives a royalty, similar to what we do in medical writing, especially with books. Most IP is transferred to manufacturers when a surgeon develops something in the form of a patent and the inventor receives a royalty. There's nothing wrong with a royalty. I'm not against it. So lastly, Dr. Wexner suggests that we allow publishers to produce their work, to produce our work, and then give it back to us for free. And I don't think any publisher will ever do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you for the insight. John, would you enlighten us as to the acronym CRAP? Steve Wexner has 2 minutes if he wishes. You can give up any portion of that time if you wish, Steve.
Do you want the 2 minutes, Jerry? Okay,
you can have it all.
Otherwise, I
you
thought that was a hint.
You own it.
Oh. Well, I'm glad that Dr. Hunter's come around to my point of view, that a royalty, which is a lease of a copyright for a finite period of time, is an acceptable solution for a publisher. And I think, as in the 2 debates we've already heard, somewhere between the 2 extremes lies a way forward that would be satisfactory to all parties. He showed the $800,000 annual tab for World Journal of Surgery, and his $2,666 was very close to my $2,700 estimate, and we didn't compare where our flights came in opposite directions. We didn't compare notes with each other sooner. But the point is that, yes, if we own our words, we can lease them for a finite period of time in exchange for a royalty, much as is done in the music industry and much as is done in other fields of science, with patents, so that we do retain copyright, although we relinquish that retention for some finite period of time in exchange for some revenue for it. If you think about editorial boards, I think most of us would feel much better continuing to volunteer, and the publishers would still have that facet of their business basically free of charge. But if you compare that to other boards in the for-profit world, board membership is generally paid and compensated, but I don't think that I would necessarily go that far. I do think that the copyright should be retained, and I do think royalty is undoubtedly the appropriate solution, as publishers do, and as you mentioned, for books and occasionally for chapters. Certainly would bring us more in line with the intellectual property transactions that go on for invention and innovation, for recording artists and for other types of other sectors of industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
We'll have time now to open this for a couple of cogent comments from the floor if anybody has any feelings about this before we take a vote.
Actually, our chair, Dr. Park, wants a vote first before it's tainted by the audience opinion.
Oh, all right. Well, we'll go ahead and take the vote now then. Remember, you voted before.
I'm from Florida. They don't let me vote at all.
So please bring up the audience response system for the vote on this. Do the words from your pen belong to you? Should you be compensated? 1 yes, 2 no. Please vote.
Can you vote twice?
No, you can't vote twice. This is not Chicago.
How come you didn't bring up the issue of published truth and untruth?
I think we have time for a couple of now cogent comments if anybody has any great feeling on this. I have just one point I'd like to ask our authors relative to our journal, Surgical Endoscopy. We should all want to put our best work in our journal to support our organization. Should we be compensated for that, or should the reward be that we're supporting our organization by doing that?
Since in a debate you don't get to rebut the rebuttal, I'll take this opportunity to say that really in the situation as in SAGES or in the International Surgical Society, where the journal is owned by the society, the royalty, which really is essentially paid by the publishing house, goes to the society. So SAGES profits from surgical endoscopy, SSAT benefits from the Journal of GI Surgery, Colorectal Society from DCNR, and International Surgical from the World Journal. So we essentially, as members of the society, contribute our royalty back to our society, and I think that's a very reasonable thing.
Well, actually, one point of correction, that the society, in this case, doesn't own the journal. Although that is true for disease of the colon rectum, it's not for surgical endoscopy.
Okay, any other final points? Well, we appreciate it. Thank you, debaters. Thank you. And thank our moderators for moderating that session.
Should we leave? Should we leave?
Yeah.
Give me my book back. It's mine.
The next debate will be titled Notes is Nuts. I think everybody knows what the acronym NOTES are. There's been enough at this, certainly at this particular meeting, natural orifice transluminal endoscopic surgery. Prior to having our debaters, Dr. DeZiel and Dr. Ratner, well-known past presidents, we will take a vote on this issue, and we can bring up the audience response system at this point. Is Notes nuts? 1 is yes, 2 is no. Please vote. Thank you. To take the affirmative that Notes is nuts, I'd like to ask Dr. Dan DeZiel from Chicago, past president, to debate this point. Dr. DeZiel.
First slide, please. My fellow surgeons, I come before you today to sound the alarm, to warn you of a threat to responsible surgical practice, and to urge you to stand together as the voice of reason against the gathering momentum of Notes. I stand before you as an open surgeon, a laparoscopic surgeon, a flexible endoscopist, and a teacher of students and residents. What is this Notes of which we speak? Natural orifice. The body is entered through one of these openings, transluminal. A hole is made in the wall of a normal visceral structure, endoscopic, so that a scope can be put into a body cavity, surgery, and an operation performed. The scope, of course, must then be removed and the hole closed. This concept has ignited the interest of surgical innovators. Experimental work is being conducted at dozens of centers around the world. Notes procedures are being performed in humans, and industry is pouring in money, hoping to develop the right gimmick or gadget. The roster of notes investigators includes prominent surgeons and gastroenterologists. Surely, all of these people have not become deranged lunatics, foaming at their endoscopes devoid of their former senses. My worthy opponent from the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts will try to convince you that notes will be better, that it is less invasive, less pain, quicker convalescence. There are no scars. As a corollary of perceived clinical benefit, public demand will follow. Notes will allow technologic advancements not heretofore seen and the opportunity for surgeons to expand their clinical skills. But stop. Let us not be led headlong like lemmings into the sea. Wise surgeons have decried these concepts as outlandish, absolute folly, not ready for prime time. Ladies and gentlemen, clinical benefit is the sole reason for surgical innovation. Let me show you why notes will not be better. How notes violate certain principles of surgery without likelihood of clinical benefit. Notes is intrinsically less safe because it unnecessarily perforates a normal organ. When the gut is open, there is microbial contamination. In this porcine model of notes, 75% of animals had intra-abdominal abscesses or positive peritoneal cultures at 14 days. Transgastric instrumentation in human routinely contaminates the peritoneal cavity with an average of over 1,000 colony-forming units per milliliter and a range up to nearly 1 million. Surely, all of these bacteria will not always be innocuous in all patients. Notes is intrinsically less safe because it is impossible to have a 100% foolproof closure of any hole in anything. In this recent review, the risk of viscerotomy leak and peritoneal infection was emphasized. In over 77,000 laparoscopic cholecystectomies, there were 5 gastric perforations, 1 in 15,000. With transgastric cholecystectomy, there would be 15,000 perforations, even if the leak rate is as inconceivably low as 1/100th of 1%, 1 in 10,000. This is 50% higher. If the leak rate is a more realistic 1 in 10th of 1%, this is 15 times higher. Notes is intrinsically less safe because the intraperitoneal portion of the operation is less safe. Exposure, visualization, and hemostasis are inferior. Let us examine the belief that notes is less invasive. Fact, there has been no proven physiologic benefit to notes. Fact, notes still requires pneumoperitoneum, usually general anesthesia, possibly still laparoscopy, and it puts an additional hole in the patient's viscera. As Professor Soper has pointed out, 1 leak is maximal trauma. My friends, there are no compelling indications for notes. I challenge my opponent to name one problem better treated by notes than by our current high standard, safe, and effective methods. No, my friends, our fear should be that unscrupulous medical providers will promote notes for marketing purposes and not for valid medical reasons. Notes is more difficult and tedious even with normal organs. Technologic advances will occur without notes. In this expert-derived agenda for research in GI and endoscopic surgery, notes ranked 22nd on a list of questions for which research was considered likely to have an important clinical impact, and only the minority of experts considered the priority for notes high. Animal use in research is justified if future human use is likely, feasible, safe. I mourn the poor swine who gave their lives so that a scope could be put into their urethra to perforate the bladder, to cross the peritoneal cavity, to perforate the diaphragm, to reach the chest. What about the public clamor for scarless surgery? In this survey, slightly more than half of patients would choose notes cholecystectomy, assuming that there was less pain, less risk, less cost involved. but the risk of a complication was considered far more important than cosmesis. In another survey, Notes ranks third in the list of preference for organ removal, and patients would accept no increased risk even if the benefits were increased. Clearly, this is not a public mandate. We are gathered here in Philadelphia, the cradle of American democracy, the birthplace of the principles that have served this nation for nearly 1/4 of a millennium. What sage words would our founding fathers have pronounced about notes? Principles made by common consent must not be trampled on by individuals. George Washington. Thomas Jefferson. Every generation needs a revolution. In matters of style, swim with the current. In matters of principle, stand like a rock. And the ever succinct Benjamin Franklin, a small leak can sink a great ship. But I must concede that not all great American patriots would have been opposed to notes. Nathan Hale, as he was to be hung as a spy by the British, is reputed to have said, "I only regret that I have one life to lose for my country." My historical sources tell me what he said was this: "I only regret that I have but one stomach to perforate for my gallbladder." In this presidential year, I have had the opportunity to brief our major candidates on the threat of notes. Senator Obama told me, "Dan, we must keep our moral compass pointed in a true direction." And Senator Clinton said, "Doctor, we must stop thinking about the individual and start thinking about what is best for society." And Senator McCain held out an olive branch to both sides of the notes aisle when he put his arm on my shoulder and said, "Son, your differences, no matter how sharply debated, are quite narrow in comparison to the remarkably durable consensus on your founding convictions." And finally, Julius Caesar, the great dictator of Rome, would have said of notes, "Men are quick to believe that which they wish to be true." Julius Caesar, a symbol of surgical sense, was killed by his own colleagues in the Senate, stabbed 23 times. Only one wound was fatal. Thing you teach students. So let us, in our collective wisdom, vote no to ill-conceived experimentation. Vote no to violations of the basic tenets of surgery that have served so many patients so well for so long. Vote no to notes, and vote yes to good surgical judgment, safe clinical practice, and responsible patient care. In the name of surgeons everywhere, I thank you.
That was beautiful. You got to introduce the second debate.
All right. Our next debater is David Ratner. The issue has been well teed up for you, Professor. David Ratner is a professor of surgery at the Harvard Medical School, the Mass General, and the Chief of General Surgery at the Mass General. David.
I concede. Well, that was more than spectacular, and I do concede on theatrical grounds, but let's talk about some data for a few minutes here. I think you're right. Notes is nuts. I didn't realize we were going to be hitting below the belt, or that we would have a moderator who is on published notes and calling it transluminal misadventure. So I think that the deck is stacked, but I will take on the challenge. I, in fact, do have some disclosures, and here they are. I have actually received reimbursement for plane tickets from both these companies. I've never gotten any cash, don't hold any stock, don't have any patents, etc. So you're right. Let's go with mom, pop, and apple pie. And let's just remember that big operations need big incisions by big surgeons. And let's think about what's going to happen in the future. And let's think about what you did in your residency, what I did in mine, and what we do today. And what we do today didn't exist when we were residents. And I think that in 25 years that our residents will do procedures that don't exist today. They'll use new paradigms to manage disease that we don't even think about. There'll be image guidance. There'll be cytosurgery, precise targeting of disease. We won't be taking organs out. We're going to just replace them. Tissue engineering, transplantation, and today's fatal illnesses are tomorrow's chronic diseases. We're already seeing this with colon cancer and metastatic colon cancer. So to hold on to what we believe and what we were trained 25 years ago is clearly folly. Now, 2005, was the first human notes procedure, at least that has been reported. And this was an appendectomy, and I think everyone's seen this video, and I intentionally am not going to show any video clips in my work. But the fact of the matter is that this proved the feasibility, and it really did shake people up. In the United States, shortly thereafter, in a what I would say very responsible fashion, notes was introduced by the Ohio State group, who combined it with staging laparoscopy and have shown that it's equivalent in terms of its sensitivity for detecting metastases from peritoneal cancer, from pancreatic cancer rather. And so there's little question that notes is feasible. Next door, while you were speaking, there was a presentation of the work from Portland and from Northwestern, and interestingly enough, the majority of their patients, at least in Evanston, Illinois, which I believe is your home state, and Portland, Oregon, would prefer to have a notes procedure over laparoscopic procedure, even if the complication rate were higher. So maybe you and I are reading different articles. There are multiple IRB studies, and as you know, to get things through an IRB at a university hospital requires a very high standard of proof. And yes, it's true that there is a viscerotomy, but there are other incisions that are not made, and this is a risk. But all risks are traded off against benefits. So ultimately, this will come down to benefits. Is it beneficial? Yes, I'm going to argue that it is. Every study that's been done so far, every report that has been done so far reports less pain for patients having notes procedures. And the procedures that they're having are not ideal notes procedures. Are there fewer scars? This no-scar acronym, has this got legs? Yes, it does. And are there fewer complications? Well, there is no data on this subject, and while you can speculate about viscerotomy leaks and you can calculate rates of viscerotomy leaks, you're ignoring things like wound infection, pulmonary complications, other things which conveniently get left out of this discussion. How about the lap chole and the notes chole? Well, I will concede to you that cholecystectomy is probably not the ideal application for notes, and the same with appendectomy. But as in any development, these are points along the way. These are proof of feasibility. This is not where notes is going to end up. We're doing these procedures now with tools that are much more rudimentary than what we started doing lap choles with. And this is the reason that the surgery is investigational and is not ready for prime time yet. But the pace of change in the 3 years since the white paper was written has been truly extraordinary, and a testimony to the responsibility of the investigators themselves and the ability to take this field in a measured fashion and slowly move it forward. So the lap chole, lap appy, and so forth that are being reported really are feasibility studies, and they're not the sweet spot, I don't think, for lap chole. But the sweet spot is going to be someplace where there's greater pain, and the greater the pain, the greater the gain will be for notes. So let's look at a couple of these that are under development. First of all, gastrojejunectomy. If you had pancreatic cancer and obstructed duodenum, would you rather have a laparotomy, or would you rather have an endoscopy and be able to eat the next day? This has been done by several different groups, very close to ready for human application. How about colectomy? Well, this has been another ideal notes application, and your friend Gerhard Boos, who wrote a negative editorial, came up to me, Dan, and put his arm around my shoulder and told me that he had invented notes and was thrilled with the way that things were progressing. So people do change their positions once they become enlightened on the subject. This is a picture from our own laboratory of a transanal sigmoid colectomy, including splenic flexure mobilization, done entirely with no incisions, totally transanally and transgastrically. I think this, in fact, may prove to be one of the killer apps, and I've shown this video before. In fact, my fellow presented it while I was speaking simultaneously of a survival series of transesophageal mediastinoscopy and thoracoscopy, in which we demonstrate survival in multiple animals without infectious complications. And we have a methodology now to traverse the esophagus, get in the chest. There's nobody who has a thoracoscopy and goes home pain-free the next day. In fact, patients have intercostal neuralgias that can last 6 to 12 months. So there is a definite advantage, and I get back to the bigger the pain, the bigger the gain will be for notes, and this is where the sweet spot is going to be. And I think that if we are focused on what exists today and what exists in the past, we are doomed to failure. Now, if there is a failure, and Dan, you did touch on this, I think there are several things that have come out of this that will be good. First of all, from the socio-political standpoint, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you have to admit that at least the technology is being introduced in a safe and a thoughtful way. We will be doing full-thickness endoluminal bowel resections in short order, and the notes frenzy has indeed stimulated investment in this area, device development, which ultimately will benefit all of our patients. And like everything else, just like the Apollo program, which put a man on the moon, hasn't really helped us a whole lot in terms of gas prices, but it did give us Velcro and a bunch of other products that were developed for the journey, and this will definitely happen from notes. As far as the cosmesis issue, it's fine for you to say that people don't care about scars, but I'm afraid that you're speaking with a typical male chauvinistic American attitude. This is quite different if you would survey our female population or look at the international community. And I would add to you this quote from the leading medical journal Newsweek by our own Santiago Horgan this week, and I will read it because the print's small. Essentially what Santi said was in 1989, 100% of the gallbladders were removed in open surgery, and yet in 2008, 98% are done laparoscopically. In 5 years, either our approach or something similar to what we're doing will become the standard of care. This technique is changing the way we think about surgery. So let me just conclude by saying that notes is not nuts. Notes is investigational, but it is a pathway to a new way of treating patients with less morbidity, less pain, faster return to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ratner. Dr. DeZiel, you have 2 minutes if you wish to use it for rebuttal before we vote again.
I don't get to rebut his.
I appreciate your talking, Dr. Ratner. What I've heard is that I might be a male chauvinist pig from Illinois that might not love my mother.
I'm being misquoted.
John Adams was from Massachusetts, your state, and to paraphrase him, he once said that facts are stubborn things. No matter what your ambitions, your hopes are for something, your imagination, the facts remain the same. And I think the facts are that although the challenges of notes might be theoretically addressed, the reality is much more complex, and there are some very serious issues. We appreciate what NOSCAR is doing, but I'm not sure that the controlled clinical introduction is always as controlled as we would hope it would be with this type of thing. As far as my mother, well, I'm the oldest of 12 kids, and naturally we would get into trouble, and naturally every time I was in trouble, my mother would say the same thing. You should have known better. You shouldn't have been there in the first place. Thank you.
Okay. Please find your audience response pads, and before we open it up for some comment, we're asked to now vote again after the debaters have titillated you. So is notes nuts? If you believe yes, is 1, 2 is no. Please vote now.
My colleagues from Chicago can vote twice. That's okay.
Thank you. We're going to open this now up for any cogent comments before we go on to our last debate. So please come to the mic. And Dr. Ratner, if you'd like to make some comments, please do. Any comments at all from the audience on this issue? Yes, I see somebody coming to this. Please introduce yourself.
Matt Shane from Lexington, Kentucky. I actually had a couple of points, one for Dr. Ratner. I'm kind of curious about, you mentioned the lack of incisions and how this is a great thing about the notes approach, but I am curious in a laparoscopic era what really the clinical significance of our 5mm ports are, and although certainly not zero, the hernia rate and other kind of complications, wound infections, so on and so forth from a 5-milliliter report, are we going to be able to improve upon that to a degree and reap that much of a benefit to warrant the perforation of a otherwise intact viscus? I also kind of question sometimes the value of cosmesis in an increasingly obese population. And more than that, I also am sometimes struck by the fallacy of the converse. And by that I mean that one of the arguments for notes sometimes is that, well, yes, this is new, but let's remember that, like laparoscopy, all great things were once new. But I would say and caution that that does not necessarily mean that all things that are new are going to be great or are great. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you for your comments. I think your arguments are well stated and cogent and appropriate. The newness thing, I don't think that notes is going to replace laparoscopy by any means, and I think it is looking for, it is in a sense looking for the sweet spot, and that's why I highlighted the areas I was pointing about. Let's be honest about one thing though, and that's that if you do a lap chole or a lap Nissen, your patients don't go back to work in 2 days. They don't. And in fact, they often don't go back in 1 week. So if you had a procedure that was equivalent to a dental extraction, for example, and patients went back in a couple of days and could work without any abdominal wall pain or parietal pain, you would probably have a benefit, and you would be willing to trade that, or some would be willing to trade it, for the risk of the viscerotomy. And I think that's the crux of the equation. You're right, just because it's new doesn't mean it's good, but certainly the preliminary results in humans are better than what people had expected. So you work at lower pressure. The visualization is superb, in many ways better than laparoscopic. The contamination issue is probably not an issue in spite of the bacteriologic data. Just as long as your viscerotomy is securely closed, and so that's the crux of it. And if you do the transanal bit and you're extracting things through the rectum, which Morris Franklin has been doing since 1992, seems like there's not a whole lot of added risk there at all, actually.
Well, I might say, Dr. Ratner, I'm not sure we know that the contamination issue is not necessarily an issue. That study that I put up from just last week, published in the Annals of Surgery, was from the Australasian Safety and Efficacy Register for newer interventional techniques. This was a systematic review of all published trials, and they found that there was a significant problem. In survival studies of animals, there was a 5% mortality rate and a 25% infection rate. These were longer-term survival studies in the animal models. So that leads to a concern that I alluded to, of course, about the translation of this into human work, how that's being done, and the legitimate concerns that I think surround this.
We'll take the three discussants at the microphone. First is the middle discussant.
Ted Sacklarides from Chicago. I wish that Professor Buis was here to set the record straight, but I think his reference to doing note surgery for 20 years refers to transanal endoscopic microsurgery, where he removes rectal tumors through the rectum, and basically what he's doing is operating on the extraperitoneal rectum, doing sleeve resections and removing it in that fashion. I think that's different than
not anymore, Ted.
Making a proctotomy.
Yeah, not anymore. You should talk to him or more recently.
Is this Dr. Felix?
Yes, I still am.
Yes.
Comment from California. I don't think Dr. Ratner is winning the female vote in my neighborhood in California. We've had many of my female colleagues say that this is a male plot, that they will agree to notes when the first surgeon takes the gallbladder out through the urethra of where. Would you comment on that, please?
I absolutely, and in fact, when Mark Bessler's report came out in the New York Times, one of our own members, a female member of SAGES, was quoted as saying that this was repulsive. I would say to each their own. If you go to other parts of the world or other parts of the country, people have a different sentiment.
Dr. Eady.
Michael Eady, New York. I can't let the number of 98% cholecystectomies done laparoscopically go by. In 2006, according to Medicare data, 120,000 laparoscopic cholecystectomies were performed compared to 20,000 open. So this is progress. 20 years down the track, we're still only at about a little over 80%.
Any comment from our debaters on that?
Well, it's the quote in the quote from Santiago. I think his point is look at how this has evolved, and look at he's really contrasting notes to 1989 and where things were. And I would just make my point again that what I do today in my practice didn't exist when I trained as a resident.
I have to call on the godfather of laparoscopy, Professor Parisad.
Yes, I think for me, notes is not nuts at all. It's a fascinating idea, but we have to remain very humble and simple. We have to demonstrate at first that making an opening on the digestive tract to have access to the peritoneal cavity has less possibility of complication than making a scar on the skin of an abdomen to penetrate the peritoneal cavity. And this is the problem. If we can demonstrate this, so it's a new field of application for an access for surgery to the abdomen. But if you cannot demonstrate this, I think we have to stop notes. And the problem at the moment is that this kind of studies have been done in a special institution for development and research. And I think those who are involved in this and those who are involved for the protection of the people have to say that this kind of clinical application is reserved and restricted to those who are studying this new approach in special institutions.
Jacques, I couldn't agree with you more. I just make a couple of points. Number one, it's investigational surgery, needs to be done under IRB protocol. Number two is that in terms of is this any good or not, you can't focus exclusively on gastric closure or vaginal closure or colotomy closure. You really have to look at what are the complication rates and the mortality rate after surgery. And until that's done, I think the debate is too narrowly focused. It's a risk and benefit trade-off.
Dr. Hunter has a final comment.
David, I have a question for you. I was really, I sort of agree with you that the transgastric cholecystectomy and appendectomy may be waypoints, as you called them, but the industry sponsors who have put $2 million into NOSCAR are really not interested in diagnostic peritoneoscopy or diagnostic thoracoscopy. They're looking for the big procedure. Right. How would you, as a sort of responsible party in NOSCAR, put your thoughts and your talk together with that economic reality?
Well, I think you have to walk before you can run, and we're going to start off diagnostically, and we're heavily, the fact of the matter is that we're heavily dependent on device development to make what are very difficult procedures, as you know, easier and safer. There's no reason, ultimately, that you couldn't do a Notes wedge resection, or, frankly, a Notes esophageal resection would be actually pretty easy. We're just in need of a couple of critical enabling pieces. We need ultimately sort of the endostitch of Notes, as it were, that will make it easy to do repetitive, complicated tasks. And I believe that we'll develop it based on prototypes that I've seen.
Let's show our appreciation for these two debaters. Our final debate of the afternoon is entitled Evidence-Based Surgery is for Those Willing to Follow Behind. New Advances Can't Wait. And our two debaters are Dr. Richard Satava, well-known past president, and Bruce McFadgen, who's also the editor of our journal. So we'll bring up the audience response system for the vote before the debate. Is evidence-based surgery for those willing to follow behind? In other words, do they slow up what we do? 1 is yes, 2 is no. Please vote. It's a pleasure to welcome to the podium Dr. Rick Satava, who will be debating For yes, evidence-based surgery is for those willing to follow behind. New advances can't wait.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to present. Unlike Dan DeZio with great eloquence and presidential plum, I am going to have to present from a position of great weakness, unfortunately. But I do give you greetings from my office, a little different than most of your other offices. And my position of weakness is I'm going against the wisdom of giants. Evidence is what we live by today. Evidence-based surgery is the direction that we're going. And so I'm arguing against that. I'm arguing that creativity and innovation is the way we need to go. We need to look at intuition in terms of leadership rather than evidence. So just like the dinosaur and the mammal, we have a job in front of us. And to better frame the issue, evidence-based surgery is, in essence, the scientific method as applied to surgery. The evidence is the science, if you will. And in order to accept the evidence-based surgery, we must accept science as the way that we will conduct all, not just some, but all of our practice of medicine and surgery. And what is science? Science is the study that relates to the phenomena of the material universe and all of their laws, according to the dictionary. Science is what we observe by using the scientific method. It's the methodology. And the scientific method is new. It's not something we've had forever. The scientific method is like science under evolution. There has been a great debate for over 4 decades. Proponents such as Thomas Kuhn and Karl Popper have been trying to elucidate what is this evolution. Why do we say that it's been evolving? Well, originally, our opportunity has come with revolution, and it occurs with breakthroughs in knowledge, and then there are periods of time when we consolidate. And at this breakthrough in knowledge, a new era occurs, and these eras are profound. Normally, they are technological breakthroughs, and they have sociological and behavioral changes. Some of the eras that we're familiar with, the classical period, when we began in science with simply observation. The Renaissance occurred, and we went from observation to phenomena, a number of observations that have things in common. And so we began describing phenomena. And then came the age of the Enlightenment, with people like Newton and Boyle. And they discovered that not only are we aware of phenomena, observations that have things in common, but in addition to that, we can experiment. And we're actually able to reproduce the phenomena that we observe. And then came the industrial method and the scientific method, if you will, in the industrial age. And this is where we began hypothesizing about what the phenomena in the world. We would conduct an experiment to prove those phenomena with the observation that we had. So if Thomas Kuhn is correct, the scientific method is indeed evolving. And if it is, what that means is the scientific method is not the end-all of the way that we will understand our science. It will not be the end-all of the way we practice medicine. The question is, what comes after the scientific method? Well, I'm completely confused and I don't know, but let me throw a few things out. The scientific method is dead, but it's only dead for those parts in which we need to prove, which we do not need to prove that which we already propose that we know. Not all science is explainable using the scientific method. Where is the origin of the hypothesis? Where do we have intuition, creativity, innovation, and serendipity as part of the scientific method? You're all clearly aware that these are key issues to innovation and leadership, but they are not part of the scientific method. And in addition to that, where is the current evidence? It's totally inadequate for some of the new sciences that are coming forward. We do not even know how to investigate things such as event horizons, quantum mechanics, cognition, and memes. All of these technologies are beyond the capabilities of the scientific method. And probably more than anything else, even in those that we think we know what we're doing and we put forward our hypothesis, the complexity today is so great that as we conduct our experiment, what we discover as that emergent properties occur. Things that we thought we knew, and we were using the evidence-based medicine and surgery to prove our point, something beyond what our common knowledge is will emerge. So emergent properties are leading us, if you will, well beyond what the scientific method could either explain or support. So, why is the scientific method failing us? We're very aware of what the scientific method is. We have hypothesis that leads to a study design. We do our experiment and get the results, and then we have the reporting, and we've proved our point. But as I mentioned before, where is creativity, innovation, and intuition? As a matter of fact, some of the leading scientists today are saying we need to invent a new kind of science. I say to you, we need to invent a new kind of surgery, a new kind of medicine. People such as Stephen Wolfram, the heir apparent, if you will, to Stephen Hawking. And second of all, can all evidence be demonstrated in controlled, randomized, double-blind studies? I would propose to you that not all of our very important technologies have gone through the scientific method. I'm looking for volunteers here in the audience. Any of you, if you would please volunteer for the study that I'm trying to prove, that parachutes are better than no parachutes. I need a control group, and anyone who's willing to be in the control group, 10,000 feet from the back of an airplane with no parachute, please see me after this lecture. So, where are we going? Well, we can't go with the scientific method. It will not allow us to do discovery, but it will prove whether or not our discoveries have merit or value. We can start with the hypothesis, right, to design a slide. And then we will do the experiment and have someone slide down, record all the events, and at the end we will generate our report. And then we will have proven unequivocally that it works. But why should we wait for the evidence-based surgery? There are unintended consequences, and the evidence is the name that everyone gives to the mistakes that they have made. And I would submit to you that the only thing that is more dangerous than trying too hard and failing is not trying hard enough and succeeding. Thank you very much.
So we're going to wind up these debates with our last debater, Dr. Bruce McFadgen, the chair of surgery at the Medical College of Georgia and the past president of SAGES, who will be arguing for the scientific method as we once knew it, and saying that no, we do need to wait for the evidence. Dr. McFadgen.
Can I have the first slide? Well, I think that it's very important from all the things that we have heard in the previous debates, as well as the things that Dr. Satava has shared with us, the scientific method is real, and it is what we are using today. And is what all of us use when we are out in clinical practice. And as we are thinking about things that will be on the horizon, and as we try and develop new ideas, evidence, previous information is extremely important. So I would say that evidence-based surgery is for those willing to follow behind. New advances can't wait. That's not true. We must have data. Why do we waste large amounts of money in research when we have very little data, just ideas or flights of ideas as we go into the laboratory, or more importantly, try and apply it in a clinical situation? We do have a lot of information available to us. We certainly are in a time now of information overload. There are certainly 17,000 biomedical books that are produced on an annual basis, 30,000 recognized diseases, 15,000 therapeutic agents. We have 20,000 biomedical periodicals, 6 million articles. How much time do you have? You do have to spend some of this time, and that's what I know this society is trying to do, is to condense some of that information as they present it here at this meeting. But a large number of journals are available. You get barraged with a large number of peer-reviewed journals, much less the non-peer-reviewed journals.
and you must sort through this type of information. It's important to know that prospective randomized trials were not really started until the early 1940s. And since that time, there have been over 100,000 prospective randomized trials which have been applied in our clinical situations. Now, what are some of the drivers of medical progress? Certainly patient demands, industry sponsorship, financial returns, decreased cost for our hospitalization of patients, decreased hospitalization and equipment costs, decreased morbidity, mortality, and certainly the issue of new technology, as was talked about by Dr. Satava. The word evidence-based medicine, and hence evidence-based surgery, was really a term which was coined by David Sackett in 1992 in an article in the American Medical Association Journal. The conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of current best evidence in making clinical decisions about the care of individual patients. It's important that we get this data together. And it's important that if we don't have the data, that we go out and seek it intensely so we can provide better patient care, so we can develop new ideas and implement those ideas in the experimental way in the laboratory, and the results of which we will then, once we get the data collected, analyzed, we will then try and apply on a clinical basis. Let's see here. We're going backwards here. Hold on. Oh, what is good evidence? Good evidence. We need control groups. We need comparison groups. We need randomization. We certainly need longer-term follow-up. And as we see some of the papers even presented at this meeting and in some of our journals, one of the problems we will see is data that gives very short-term follow-up. What about, for instance, in hernia repairs? New things are coming out. New types of meshes are tried. Follow-up, 1 year, 6 months, 2 years. Is that long enough? Probably not. We need more data to tell our patients successfully what is important. Blinding, population sizes. If you look at your statistical data in a lot of the journals out there, the statistical data is extremely weak. Analyze that in detail so that we have accurate information, accurately apply in clinical situations. Length of the study, and certainly well-defined outcome criteria. We need to know where we want to go with this particular study that we're looking at. So evidence-based surgery is really, it's a process. It's really a translation of uncertainty to an answerable question. It's systematic retrieval of the best evidence that's possible, critical appraisal of evidence for validity, clinical relevance, and applicability. And it's the application of evidence in practice, the evaluation of performance. These are the key things. As we take it, it's the whole process. It's not the end by itself. It's not cookbook medicine. It's not a formula. I know that one of the things that a lot of our hospital administrators like to do is to move evidence-based medicine to guidelines, but the physicians are driving the guidelines, but then the hospital administrators, because of cost issues, want to develop protocols. And if you're off the protocol, it's considered not cost-effective, and you're not considered a good physician. Be careful of that. That's not the proper use of evidence-based medicine. So evidence-based medicine really seeks to integrate the best and most current empiric evidence with the full range of scientific knowledge and clinical judgment. It's the basis for guidelines, and as physicians, we also assess risks and benefits. We must be careful not to insert our own bias. Now, this just gives you an idea of levels of evidence that we talk about. Now, always the problems we talk about are, this is my experience with one case, and one case doesn't make a series. Certainly the weakest form of evidence that we have. but we can go all the way up to those where we have meta-analyses. And if you will look at the number of review libraries that are out there that have large numbers of these meta-analyses, case-controlled studies, prospective randomized trials, there are numerous numbers that are out there. So progress is made by questioning the way we habitually do things, by modifying the old and trying the new. It's curiosity and imagination. And evidence-based surgery can shape and channel imagination, but it does have limitations because it sometimes can be within narrow limits. But it can, and sometimes it can get in the way of speculation that is necessary for scientific progress. But again, all of these things require as much evidence as possible, and with these things, good judgment is extremely important in order to not only apply these things on an experimental level, but also in a clinical situation. Why isn't this going forward? It's not going forward. Can you move that forward for me, please? Innovation. It's an idea formulated, a concept developed, supporting evidence obtained, a plan of implementation developed. We must get IRB approval, not only for those things in the laboratory, but also on a clinical basis. Data is collected from research clinical studies. And so that it's important that we gather the data, research the problem that we're trying to go forward with, and then to apply it in initially an experimental situation and then in a clinical situation. So the studies must be monitored, data analyzed, registries developed. SAGES has done that with the laparoscopic cholecystectomy, and certainly with colonoscopy. And NOSCAR is now bringing its own registry together, combination between ASGE and certainly with SAGES. So we must consider clinical questions should be focused, it should be answerable, and it should be relevant. We must have a goal in mind. It should be patient-oriented. We must compare interventions that we might consider and what is the outcome that we're trying to accomplish. So there are many factors in our clinical decision. Evidence is key, and certainly the patient-physician factors are important, and the constraints that are around us with the patient, with the hospital, and with the equipment that we may have available. These are just some of the review sites that are available to you that are out there. Numerous ones, and if you Google Google Scholar is just a tremendous reference source that one can use. So the issues are public awareness, legal liabilities, industry pressures, personal, academic, and financial gain, government regulations, institutional review boards are very helpful in helping us to clarify the study that we're trying to do. In surgical endoscopy several years ago, there was a wonderful editorial as laparoscopic cholecystectomy was being looked at and was being evaluated, and there were a large number of reports of bile duct injuries. And the title was Frontiers in General Surgery, Pioneers, Cowboys, and Desperados. And I think that that is just really was a wonderful takeoff, really, of what was happening actually in the area of laparoscopic cholecystectomy, because there were the pioneers who started the whole process. And then there were the cowboys who took not only what they learned in cholecystectomy and then applied it without any concern or concern for the patient and went off and did every kind of thing, no matter what the hospital or patient constraints were. Of course, the desperado was the one who did a lot of damage and hurt many, many people. But the pioneer, new ideas, data-driven as much as possible, differentiates what is new and what's better, and may try new methods as opposed to doing only the tried and true methods, and willing to explore new frontiers. It's a mixture of doing right while doing what is possible, and it utilizes new technology appropriately. So we must differentiate propaganda from evidence, probability from certainty, data from assertions, rational belief from superstition, and science from superstition. So in conclusion, innovation, progress, improved patient care are based on ideas, clinical trials, and scientific evidence. It is not IBS, which may stand for irritable bowel syndrome, and that may be what happens if you start some of these things without much evidence, but it is not idea-based surgery. I think Goethe had it right. There's nothing more dangerous than ignorance in action. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McFadgen. Dr. Satava, you have a minute or two to rebut.
To my esteemed colleague, I bow. Without question, he is correct in as far as he goes. Regrettably, scientific investigation has more than one component. Actually, it has two. It has innovation and it has evidence-based. And so I think that we are actually in violent agreement. I have no problems with subjecting all of the new innovations that we come up with to an evidence-based trial. However, we will never make progress if we don't do innovation. And my supposition is that innovation and evidence-based trials are two separate and counterintuitive processes. And so going back to the question that we were asked to address, I would submit that evidence-based surgery indeed is for followers. There is no question about that, and I agree with him 100%. It's not for the leaders, it's for our followers. After we've proven something is safe, it's effective, then we can go forward. But if you're talking about innovations, if you're talking about moving forward, then you're talking about innovation. It's the difference between dinosaurs and mammals. And I submit to you, would you rather be a dinosaur and a mammal? We need both, and you can't be both. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, please find your keypad. Let's take our second vote to see if our debaters have swayed you. Let's bring up the audience response system, please, for us. Remember, you're voting on the issue, is evidence-based surgery for those willing to follow behind? If it is, vote yes. If it's to, vote no. Please vote now. We have a couple of minutes to open this up for any other cogent remarks from the audience. Anybody has any particular view on this?
Let me ask a question for both debaters. There's little doubt that when a new procedure or a new piece of technology has been subjected to the highest level of evidence, a randomized clinical trial, that it becomes over time and maybe immediately the standard of care and is paid for by our payers, by Medicare, by the Blue Cross. How about innovation? Who should pay for innovation? Should it be venture capital that pays for a new device that's going to make it easier to take out the gallbladder? Should they pay for part of it, just the device itself, and the insurance company should pay for the cholecystectomy? Or should they be responsible for the whole bill?
I think that when innovation comes along, which I strongly would encourage that type of thing, that I think the initial work has to be done in the laboratory, and the training, the appropriate training, all of that needs to be done by the companies that are developing these new products or new techniques along with the investigator themselves. I think that we need to collect the data. We need to get strong evidence, and it's becoming more and more that, as I was mentioning, the problem with the evidence-based medicine problem is the fact that you go to guidelines, the next step, they're protocols, and anything that gets off of that becomes a cost issue. And the issue is this is going to be a major constraint as is already shown with the development of these new endoluminal techniques that are going off the market because people are not willing, payers are not willing to pay for those types of things. I think that the evidence is becoming more and more compelling that these things on a long-term basis, the endoluminal products for GERD, are showing great promise, and we should be able to convince our payers that that's so.
I would look at innovation at a much earlier stage, perhaps, than what you're suggesting, in the sense that when one wants to find a new idea, it's not only from our industry or industry partners, but it's other places. It's in the government, the federally funded researchers, in the labs, and it's also in our academia. And so there's not one place that innovation occurs, but there's a broad spectrum.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for your comments. We're going to conclude this session with what has been a very engaging and entertaining and informative set of presentations with some of the data. We're now interested to see how you, the people, have voted and responded. So let's go to the top of the order now. And I have to point out from the outset that some of the discussants and debaters had more difficult positions to defend than others, and I will certainly grant them that. And so one of the things that we're going to be looking for is how people moved the bar or moved the needle. So for the first question, is the academic medical center failing? The majority of the audience clearly thought that the academic medical center was failing. Now, this was, Swanstrom was to support this, and Soper was to give the counter view. What did the audience decide? What was the post-debate score? Wow, well, look at that. So Soper seems to have swayed a good, a good portion of the audience. All right, let's go on to the second question now. And this was, should surgeons be paid to take call? And poor old Des had a tough road to hoe here. So at the outset, 82% of you thought that we should be paid to take call. And following the debate, 5% more of you were persuaded that we should be paid to take call. It was a valiant effort, Des. I don't know if you're still here, but it was a valiant effort. All right, the third issue to be debated, who owns what you write? And at the outset, the strong inclination was that, that you should own what you write, and this was what Wexner had to contend, and then Hunter was giving the counter view. And were any of you swayed in your view? What was the post-debate? Oh, there you go. There is, so John, you made up some ground there. Didn't convince everybody, but you certainly made up some ground. All right, now on to the fourth issue, is notes nuts. At the outset, interestingly, the majority, two-thirds almost, not quite two-thirds, thought that notes was nuts. And after a very engaging debate, what did you then think? Oh, interesting.
Did some moving.
So slightly, about 5% were persuaded that it's not quite as nuts as you thought it was at the outset. All right, and on to our final question, is evidence-based surgery for those willing to follow behind. The majority of you thought that that was not the case, so apparently Dr. McFadden had an easier road at the outset, but post-debate your opinion was, oh, you changed. You seem to have changed your view on that. So now most of you think that evidence-based surgery is not the way that we should be going forward. I'm not sure if that's the note on which we should be concluding this conference. Nevertheless, I want to thank the speakers and our esteemed moderators and your attention for this session.